Hello there. Today I'm trying a wine that I found in a wine shop recently that drew my attention instantly because it was very well priced and it carries the Becot name. So this is a label that's very akin to the property that the Becot family own, which is the Premier Grand Cru Classé B Beauséjour Bécot from Saint-Émilion. This is the 2018 vintage of Instant Becot. So not the Grand Vin of the Saint-Émilion Grand Cru Classé. In fact, simply a wine classified as AOC Bordeaux, but produced by the same family. Now I was interested to see what the wine was like, and I've tried to research it, but I haven't actually found an awful lot of information about this wine in particular. We know that it's a blend that's predominantly Merlot. We know that the fruit comes off old vines that have grown on a calcareous clay plateau. We know the vineyards are outside Saint-Émilion. From the label I can see that the blend is in fact 85% Merlot, 14% Cabernet Franc with 1% of Malbec in there. The label also says that this is a wine that's made to be approachable and to be drunk young, and I guess the fact that it's called Instant Becot really is all we should need to know about that. So what else do we know? We know that it's made by the Becot family. So a little bit of background there. The Becot family evidently have lived in Saint-Émilion since the 1790s, but their current ownership of an estate, Beauséjour Bécot, dates back to the purchase of a chateau called Château La Carte in 1929. It was a 4.45 hectare estate on the Côte in Saint-Émilion, on the limestone Côte, and a historic site for growing vines. I mean, the Romans are recorded as having grown vines on these slopes. Now, the story really starts after the Second World War, when somebody called Michel Becot inherits this small property. Now, Michel is a car parts dealer working in Bordeaux, and in those days the income from a 4.45 hectare property in Saint-Émilion would not have been sufficient to have kept his family. However, he was quite an eager weekend viticulturist and applied himself with some vigour to the estate. But then in 1969 an opportunity came up to buy 9 hectares of the neighbouring property, which was known at that stage as Beauséjour-Fagouet, or Beauséjour-Dr-Fagouet, which was a portion of a larger estate that had been split off decades earlier. And Michel Becot's approach was to take the two properties and combine them as one, and he named this property Beauséjour Bécot. 10 years later, in 1979, another opportunity came up to buy a contiguous vineyard, that of Trois Moulins, which was a neighbouring 4.5 hectare vineyard. Michel purchased this and again combined the property, actually feeling that it improved the overall quality of the wines being made. And for 6 years he continued to sell this under the estate's designation as a Saint-Émilion Premier Grand Cru Classé Level B. But then in 1985, the announcement of the reclassification of Saint-Émilion dealt Michel the bitter blow of a really quite unexpected downgrading by the INAO, the Institut National Appellation d'Origine, of his estate to Grand Cru Classé status. Their argument being that he hadn't actually applied for permission to combine the estates. I mean, he'd been allowed to carry on selling the wine for 6 years. As I say, I think for Michel it was quite unexpected, and he took it very personally, retiring that year, handing over the management of the property to his sons Gerard and Dominique. Now, Gerard and Dominique really sort of rose to the challenge of the downgrading of the estate and rapidly instituted many new practices on the estate. They engaged the consultant enologist Michel Roland to help them make the wines. They started green harvesting. They started picking into cagettes, into shallow baskets. They introduced sorting tables at the winery. They rebuilt their cellars. And so with these many approaches to improving quality, when the 10-year reclassification of Saint-Émilion came around again in 1996, Beauséjour Bécot was returned to its status as a Saint-Émilion Premier Grand Cru Classé Class B. In 2001, the family bought a second property in what was then the Côte de Castillon, and is now known as Castillon Côte de Bordeaux. Really, they bought a vineyard. It was a Ludi called Joannine, which was rechristened Château Joannine Becot
and over the years they've acquired other plots of vines to increase the estate's size to 15 hectares. The estate's situation in Castillon-Côte de Bordeaux is about 12 kilometres to the east of Saint-Émilion, and here again we see a limestone plateau with clay soils. From an early stage, Juliette Becot, Gerard's daughter, was put in charge of running Château Beau-Séjour, and she and her husband Julien Barf eventually took over running Château Beau-Séjour Bécot along with the rest of the family's estates in 2014. As far as I can see, the first vintage of Instant Becot was also produced in 2014. Given the fact that this is a wine from calcareous clay soils, it does leave me wondering whether this is actually a wine that is predominantly from that estate, but I have no information to confirm that whatsoever. It just seems logical. As for the winemaking, again, I have no details. We are told, however, that the winemakers from Beauséjour Bécot oversee the winemaking for this wine. So it would be fair to assume then that approaches such as green harvesting, hand picking into cagettes and sorting at the winery are all applied to this wine. We know this is a wine for drinking young. We've already seen the blend is quite heavily Merlot at 85%, which should make it more accessible, sort of less structured than a wine with more Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon or Malbec in it. One would assume the wine would undergo a shorter maceration to give less astringent tannins and would spend less, if any, time in oak, certainly less new oak, and probably not be aged anywhere near as long before release. As I say though, all of these are assumptions. So let's have a taste of the wine and see how it stacks up, shall we? I'm actually quite impressed by what a deep colour we have here. I mean, 2018 is a relatively powerful vintage, but that's virtually opaque. I can only just make out the stem of the glass through the wine there. There's a deep, relatively dark reddish colour with a slight mauvish hint at the rim. It's not losing any colour to the rim particularly. As I swirl it, it's almost staining the glass. There's a 14% alcohol here, and the wine is hanging and only quite slowly forming tears on the glass there. It is quite viscous. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas have some lovely lifted perfumes. Not surprisingly for a wine that's predominantly Merlot, there are plummy notes, but there's also a sort of a lifted red currant and perhaps a hint of cassis in there. There is a lovely, fresh, high-toned perfume to the wine. That's very attractive. There are no obvious oak notes on the aromas, though, I would say. So let's have a taste. On the palate, on the front of the mouth, that's good and fresh. There's a smoothness to the texture and a richness. It really is actually beautifully smooth. And yet there's a richness and a core to the wine that, you know, there's a concentration. They were talking about this being the product of old vines. And I can certainly see good concentrated fruit in there. There's almost a licoricey core there, surrounded by lovely rich red fruit. There's sort of cranberries, there's red currants. It's lively red fruit. I'm not particularly seeing new oak notes. There isn't a sort of a cedar or a cinnamon note. There is, however, a graininess to the structure, sort of across the middle of the palate, that makes me think the wine probably has seen a little bit of oak and possibly a little bit of new oak. The alcohol at 14% is clearly adding roundness and richness to the palate there. It's not particularly adding hotness because there is this rich, juicy fruit that almost sort of has a red cherry ripeness, but then there's not quite the brightness of red cherries. You've almost got a core of sort of black plum, damson, bullace, that sort of darker fruit. sort of making up the mid palate. The wine is rich and really quite sort of licorice and black plum at the finish. However, although the finish has a fair amount of weight and structure, there is a lovely freshness that gives a sort of a clean note to the finish and just allows a little bit of that sort of red fruit perfume that I was talking about on the aromas just to stand out from the finish there. I do think this is a wine that's very approachable now. I think it's probably a wine that you could keep for 4 or 5 years if you wanted to, but I don't really see any need for it. It is approachable now. It has a lovely freshness, and it shows a little of the freshness and perfumed balance that I would expect from Beauséjour Bécot itself. So from that point of view, it actually does seem to reflect the wines being made at the family's leading property. I'm actually very impressed by this wine. I was looking at the aggregated critics score that we have for Instant Becot on Wine Searcher, and that's at just 87 points there, which I think is a reasonable score, but I actually think that just at the moment this wine is perhaps exceeding that and is certainly providing a wonderful drinkability. For its price, I've been very impressed by this. I think if you enjoy the wines of Saint-Émilion, I think you might be very interested by this. I think it's quite a classy wine that offers lovely value for money. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you found the video of interest. If you have enjoyed it, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more, the best answer would be to sign up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can set yourself a reminder and get an alert every time we publish a new video. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on. We'd really love your support in that way. If you have any comments you'd like to make, please leave those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear what you think actually about the tastings we're doing, the wines we're looking at, or anything else that relates to that. I'll leave a link to this vintage of this wine on the Wine Searcher website so that you can follow that and you can find out where the wine's available, what its pricing is, and any other details we have about the wine. So thank you again for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Thanks again. Bye for now.